Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really deep question about suffering. And what if it actually has a purpose? We're going to kick things off with a true story that is, well, pretty wild.
Okay, so think about this. Most of us spend pretty much our whole lives trying to avoid pain, right? But what if we just flipped that completely? What if you couldn't feel physical pain at all? You'd think that's a good thing, a blessing even. But could it actually be a curse?
Well, to get to the bottom of that, let's look at the true story of a young girl. Her condition really makes you rethink everything you assume about pain.
So her story was actually featured in an ABC documentary. And on the surface, her condition, it sounds like a superpower, doesn't it? I mean, imagine never wincing when you get a shot. But for Gabi, the reality was, well, it was the opposite of heroic. It was absolutely terrifying.
See, without pain, Gabi's body just didn't have an alarm system. So when she fractured her jaw, it wasn't this, screaming emergency. It was just a silent injury that nobody knew about until a really dangerous infection set in. She didn't have that natural reflex to protect her own eyes, which led to permanent damage. She actually had to wear protective goggles all the time. Just think about that for a second. For her and her family, every single object, every single moment was a potential threat. A life without pain turned out to be a life in constant danger.
And Gabi's story really highlights something critical for our whole discussion today. It's this crucial difference between physical pain and a much, much deeper kind of hurt.
This difference is so fundamental, some languages actually have totally separate words for it. In Korean, for example, tongjang is that purely physical thing, that biological alarm system that Gabi was missing. But gotung, that's suffering. That's the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual anguish we feel when we're going through a hard time. It's the kind of hurt that cuts way deeper than just the body. You can actually see this exact idea play out in a 2011 Korean film called Pained. The main character, a guy named Nam Soon, goes through this horrible accident where he loses his family. The trauma is so bad he can no longer feel any physical pain, and he actually turns this into a job, working as a debt collector who'll, hurt himself to scare people into paying up. But here's the thing, even though he's physically numb, he is still totally and completely capable of feeling emotional suffering.
So that brings us to the real paradox, doesn't it? A life without pain, like Gabi's, is technically possible. Heck, we can numb pain with medicine. But a life without suffering? That seems to be a whole different ballgame. It feels like suffering is just woven into the fabric of our minds, our relationships, our very spirit. Maybe it's just an inescapable part of being human.
All right, so if suffering is this universal thing that we all have to deal with, what's the worst it can get? What is the deepest form of suffering possible? To even begin to answer that, people throughout history have looked to their biggest, most foundational stories, trying to find an example of suffering pushed to its absolute limit.
And the source material for today's explainer points to one specific cry, a cry that is echoed down through the centuries as the answer. It's a cry of just complete and total desolation.
My God, why have you forsaken me?" is often held up as the absolute peak of human suffering. And it's not because of the physical torment of the crucifixion. No, it's about what that cry represents, the feeling of being totally, utterly, and completely abandoned by God.
And to really get why that cry is so different, just look at how it compares to others. In a lot of Psalms, like Psalm 6 or Psalm 4, the person crying out is talking to God. They see God as a judge who can give them justice or a healer who can fix them. But Psalm 22, it's different. That cry is directed out into what feels like just a silent void. The ultimate suffering isn't the pain itself. It's the terrible feeling that the one you're crying out to is silent, distant, completely absent.
Okay, so this is so important. It basically creates a whole new category of hurt. We've got physical pain, right? Then we have emotional suffering. But this is what some theologians call passion. It's a very specific kind of spiritual suffering that's all about that deep, profound sense of being abandoned by the divine. The real sting isn't the problem you're facing, it's that crushing, soul-deep feeling that you are facing it completely and utterly alone.
So, let's bring this down from the abstract and into the real world. How does this idea of spiritual abandonment actually play out when life hits you hard?
Well, the author of our source material shares a really personal story. Back in 2011, his mother, a woman who had worked hard her entire life, had a terrible fall and got a severe head injury. For weeks, he was at the ICU, and he just felt totally powerless. And as the months dragged on, he realized that all the theology he'd ever studied, all those books and concepts, they felt empty, just hollow words in the face of his family's raw, very real suffering.
And that personal crisis forced him to confront one of the oldest, toughest questions there is, what philosophers call the problem of theodicy. You know the one. Why do good people suffer? Why would a loving God let his mom, a good person, go through something so senseless? It shook his faith right down to its foundations.
But right there, in the middle of that crisis, staring into that feeling of total abandonment, he came across a different way of looking at it, a framework that didn't just magic the suffering away, but instead gave it a potential purpose.
He found this passage from the book of Romans, and what he saw there was, honestly, a radical reframing of the whole thing. Hardship wasn't being presented as some pointless dead end. Instead, it was framed as the very first step in a process of transformation.
And he connected this to an idea from a theologian named John Hick, a concept called soul-making. The basic idea is this: what if the world, with all its rough patches and challenges, isn't a bug, but a feature? What if it's designed to be a kind of spiritual gym, where every hardship is like a weight you lift, the resistance you need to build up the muscle of your character, of your very soul?
So what this lays out is like a path, a kind of spiritual transformation. It all starts with step one, suffering, that raw, unavoidable trial. But according to this way of thinking, that's just the starting block. By pushing through it, you develop perseverance. That's step two. That's the strength you gain from enduring. And that perseverance, in turn, forges your character, step three. You become this refined, tested person who knows what they're made of. And then, finally, comes hope. But it's not some flimsy, wishful thinking. It's a deep, resilient hope that can only be born from a character that's already been tested. It's hope that's been earned.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty challenging thought. What if the purpose of suffering isn't some big secret we have to figure out? What if instead its purpose is something we're meant to create, something we forge inside ourselves by taking our deepest pain and transforming it into our greatest strength? It's a powerful idea to think about. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.